esa de los ideólogos de género que consideran que el sexo es una construcción social. Así que con la idea de que mujeres y hombres somos iguales, ahora tenemos a tíos de 1,95 m y 90 kilos compitiendo contra mujeres de 1,80 m y 65 kilos en la Liga Juvenil de Baloncesto de Valencia. Sin embargo, parece que la cosa no está saliendo bien, y más que en integración, está derivando en protestas y desmotivación, principalmente para ellas, al terminar los partidos con diferencias de 50 puntos de media. Es una decepción absoluta. Por mucho que trabajemos y entrenemos, es frustrante, explicaba Elena Cardo, integrante del club de baloncesto de Benimaclet. Y es que por mucho que tratemos de ignorar a la naturaleza, las diferencias anatómicas entre hombres y mujeres son evidentes. Incluso los hombres que pretenden ser mujeres, pese a hormonarse, siguen conservando sus atributos originales de hombre, y ahora son ellos los que están arrasando en la mayoría de deportes femeninos, donde las mujeres de verdad tienen las de perder, como este atleta que queda primero, el único transgénero que participa en la carrera.
Las atletas transgéneros siguen teniendo la fuerza de un hombre, concluyó un estudio científico. Un estudio publicado en el Journal of Medical Ethics señala que aunque los niveles de testosterona de un hombre bajen, como sucede en el cambio de hombre a mujer, la cantidad de masa muscular que pierden no es significativa. El estudio también indica que los efectos indirectos de la testosterona no son alterados por la terapia hormonal. Es decir, que aunque un hombre transgénero sea menos fuerte de como lo era antes del cambio, los beneficios biológicos que le fueron dados al nacer, diferentes a los de la mujer, permanecen. Ya existen atletas que están mostrando su descontento con esta situación, como la nadadora olímpica Sharon Davis, quien advirtió que dejar a los hombres trans entrar en las categorías de mujer puede arruinar el deporte femenino.
Tu donativo económico. Desde que el Comité Olímpico Internacional empezó a aceptar en 2015 la enloquecida ideología trans, muchas asociaciones de mujeres deportistas han impedido al organismo que se replantee el tema que amenaza con destruir el deporte femenino. Creemos que los hombres atletas no deben competir contra las mujeres, dice el manifiesto de Say Women Sports enviado al COI. Que un hombre atleta diga autoidentificarse como mujer, mujer trans o trans mujer, no hace que deje de ser un hombre. Si permitimos a varones competir en deportes femeninos, habrá deportes de hombres y deportes de ambos sexos, pero ya no habrá deporte femenino, señala el manifiesto. El manifiesto que se adhieren asociaciones de mujeres deportistas, entidades feministas y asociaciones familiaristas, dirigiéndose a los directivos del COE, insisten. Permitir que los hombres atletas se autoidentifiquen como mujeres atletas es irresponsable, negligente y peligroso. Al adoptar la política transgénero en 2015, se ha abandonado el deber de proteger la seguridad e integridad de las mujeres y los deportes femeninos. Esto implica una discriminación flagrante contra las mujeres por razón de sexo. Los hombres no deben competir contra las mujeres en el deporte. La fundadora de Safe Women's Sport, Beth Stilzer, explica en su testimonio que inició esta alianza después de experimentar hostigamiento de extremistas de género. Me considero una mujer como cualquier otra. Soy mamá, ama de casa, emprendedora, coach de salud, levantadora de pesas amateur y ahora activista de los derechos de las mujeres. Después de entrenar un par de años para ganar confianza, para competir a nivel estatal, mi oportunidad de brillar la oscurecieron activistas de género porque no se permitía competir a un varón en un campeonato femenino. Me acosaron en redes sociales junto a otras competidoras por defender la biología. La biología dice cosas como que los varones tienen huesos más densos, brazos más largos, torsos más cortos. Las mujeres tienen pelvis distinta que aumenta la curvatura de la espina dorsal inferior y tienen útero, menstruación. Al menos desde 1983, la diferencia de rendimiento deportivo entre hombres y mujeres no se reduce. Tu donativo económico nos ayuda.
Transgender MMA fighter has said she wants a license to fight in California.
A biological male has just become the first transgender person to win a world title in cycling.
First transgender weightlifter winning her maiden international event as a woman.
A biological male winning a gold medal in a women's event now seems a matter of when, not if.
Since sports events began, men and women have been segregated by gender to make the competitive events fairer due to differences in muscle mass, innate strength, or testosterone levels. days, these physical differences no longer seem to be a determining factor.
There are all kinds of reasons that people have advantages. Somebody's parents can give them year-round training. Somebody else is really, really tall and someone's really, really short.
Sport has never been fair. You bought into that myth, so have a lot of other people. But let's face it, if I wanted to be a jockey, I couldn't be. Nature endows her gifts unevenly in society.
It's true that some physical characteristics give athletes an unusual advantage in sports, like Michael Phelps' long arms or Usain Bolt's height. But the genetic difference of being born as a male or female and competing with the opposite gender proved to be more of a determining factor than any bodily developments in sports.
If you go through puberty, you have all the benefits of having a male body. And even if you transition and reduce your testosterone, you're still going to have those benefits. You're going to have the bone structure, the slightly bigger heart, more red blood cells. So therefore, a female athlete competing with a transgender female is always going to be at a disadvantage.
Testosterone levels are important because the amount of the hormone defines the eligibility of athletes to compete whenever sporting events are limited to a single sex, following IAAF rulings.
The idea that we need to protect women's or female sport from other women and females is itself inherently discriminatory. No testosterone policy will ever work.
Male to female athletes no longer need to have reassignment surgery, but they do need to demonstrate that their testosterone levels have been below 10 nanomole per litre for at least 1 year, according to the 2016 International Olympic Committee guidelines.
It's not saying you're a man or a woman. It's saying you can compete. It's a matter of eligibility to participate in certain competitions.
In the case of female to male athletes, they can compete without restrictions.
The 10 nanomoles per litre, as I understand it, something like 90% of female athletes, their testosterone levels are around 3 nanomoles per litre. So in other words, this upper limit is 3 times what would be typical in a female athlete. So it seems like a kind of arbitrary setting unrelated to the realities of the situation.
Well, I actually agree with you there.
But what happens with student athletes who decide to change their gender? Well, the rules are not clear at all. Most countries don't have clear regulations, and the biggest student sports organization in the US, the NCAA, does not require gender confirmation or a legal recognition of a player's transition sex in order for transgender players to participate on a team that matches their identity, at least 1 year of hormone treatment prior to competing on a female team. In the middle of all this legal mess, Zuby, a UK-based rapper, basically identified as a female and broke British women's weightlifting records.
Saying, look, I'm not a professional powerlifter, but even I myself, I can stroll into the gym on any given day, and I can break the British women's bench press record. I can break the British women's deadlift record. When I'm on form, I could potentially break the British female squat record. And I don't even compete.
So if you're a woman and you're a natural woman and you don't take any extra hormones or male hormones, you're not taking steroids or any sort of performance-enhancing drugs, you're doing your very best to compete and you're at the top of the heap. But then someone comes along that was a man for 30 years and decides that they're going to be a woman, and this has happened, and literally transitioned a few months ago, and competes as a woman and destroys records and dominates you in that sport. That's bullshit.
Awarded to the city of Tokyo.
In July 2020, billions of people will watch the Olympic flame burn once again as the Tokyo Olympics begin. But with new rules making it easier for transgender women to compete in women's events for the first time, 2020 could turn out to be a highly controversial Olympic Games. There's a heated debate in women's sports over the inclusion of transgender women, people who are biologically male and identify as women.
This is about, are trans women actually women? And it's clear that legally and socially we are, so why exclude us from sport? This isn't about saying to someone, you can't live your life as a transgender woman, but you can't just ignore the fact that biology is something that, as humans, we have.
International Olympic Committee rules currently allow transgender women to compete in women's sports, provided they have suppressed their testosterone levels for at least 12 months. But some observers, like former Olympic swimmer and medalist Sharon Davies, argue these athletes will have an unfair advantage.
You're not going to be able to get rid of the male puberty that they've gone through, the fact that they have male biology. So even by reducing testosterone for 1 year, it's still not going to level the playing field.
But others take a very different view, like track cyclist Rachel McKinnon, who has become a high-profile transgender athlete since winning a world championship in 2018.
Athletes come in a huge range of shapes and sizes and natural abilities. Population demographics around the world are different. So Dutch women average height is over 5'6". Indonesian women is around 4'10". So sport is never level, if by which we mean no one has a competitive advantage over each other, because that's the point of sport.
During male puberty, testosterone drives the development of bigger muscles with more fast-twitching fibers, sturdier bones, and a larger heart and lungs. All lifelong advantages when it comes to speed and strength. The difference between boys' and girls' running times increases in adolescence, and the gap is even bigger for jumping events. And in 2019, among top athletes, around 2,000 men finished the 100 meters more quickly than the fastest woman. Sharon Davies believes there is a danger that transgender athletes could dominate some women's sports, and that these sports could once again be blighted by unfairness.
In the 70s and the 80s, we had the East German system where female athletes were filled full of testosterone, and it made them unbeatable. So for nearly a whole generation, the East German women totally dominated in almost all female sports at Olympic and world level. But there were many British that came 4th and 5th and 6th, and no one's ever heard of them because they didn't pick up a medal, which they should have done. So I feel quite passionately that I just don't want to see that happen to a whole generation of female athletes again.
Davies and others who have voiced their concerns have faced strong criticism from the transgender community and beyond.
You have been called by the transgender cyclist Rachel McKinnon a transphobe and somebody who shares hate speech.
McKinnon argues the debate is fundamentally about equality and human rights, both on and off the playing field.
Inclusion is a fundamental principle in society. So I think that applies also to sport, that applies to intersex women, cis women, and trans women, that to be considered fully equal members of society, to be respected in our identities, is to be included in sport for who we are. And trans women are women.
The IOC says it actively supports both inclusion and fairness. It was due to announce stricter guidelines for transgender athletes in September 2019, but so far, its panel of scientists have failed to agree on what these should be.
I think we need to race based on biology. So I think the very simple, straightforward way to race is based on your chromosomes. And if you carry a Y chromosome, which gives you a benefit, a Y benefit, a male benefit to your strength levels and your testosterone levels, then you need to race where it's apparent. So we should have an XX female category protected and an open category which is then inclusive for absolutely everybody that wants to be able to compete. So I just think there's ways forward, but it doesn't mean the destruction of female sport.
While countries will be competing to make their mark on the medal tables, the 2020 Olympics could also prove to be a decisive moment in the wider global debate about gender identity.
Thanks for watching.
India.
What do you think? Is this fair and reasonable?
Well, you don't need a medical test, you just need an eyeball test. It's there right in front of us. You know, there's an individual who's, 270, maybe 300 pounds, competing against much smaller individuals. There's no doubt that testosterone makes you stronger, more aggressive. You go through a male puberty, you have bigger joints, you have bigger bones. All these factors. I am a massive sports fan. Obviously, I want good things for transgender people, but I just think it's the line that you cannot cross. You have to be respectful. First and foremost, I transitioned to be a woman. I respect women. That's what I am now, and I just think it is grossly unfair. You are stealing people's dreams. Wow.
Okay, well, this very strong words, and that's how a lot of people feel about this. Joanna, this is a tweet I just got from Chris Tomlinson, 3-time Olympic long jumper, world, indoor and European medalist, and a dad. And he just said, the physical advantages a man has over a woman in sport are mammoth. I believe men converting to women, then competing in the women's category, could wreck women's sport. I do hope Piers Morgan speaks up for women's rights. This is my point. Nothing I'm about to say to you is transphobic. I completely support transgender rights, and I have great respect for people who want to transition. My issue is where transgender rights appear to be deemed more important to women's rights, even when they're clearly damaging women's rights. And I'll give you one example. If Usain Bolt decided tomorrow to transition to be a woman and compete in the Olympics in the women's 100-meter final, would that be fair?
Not tomorrow. But after a year of hormone therapy, he'd be running 10-12% slower, and he would only be approximately as fast as the fastest women's sprinters.
He could run 50% slower, couldn't he, and still win?
50%? No, there's only a second difference between the fastest men and the fastest women. It's 10%. He would lose that. My data shows it, and he would only be as fast as the fastest.
With the greatest respect, you know, I've been on hormones now for 3 years, and after a year I still had some residue strength, and there was still that difference.
And also we have these sprinters in Connecticut, for example. There are 2 young sprinters who were competing as male sprinters, now competing as female sprinters, smashing all records in Connecticut for women sprinting, clearly have had no demonstrable difference in their speeds, and are destroying women's rights to the extent that Connecticut's now being sued, the authorities there, by other women who feel the competition now is grotesquely unfair, and that they themselves have had their own dreams and their own battle for fairness, equality and success destroyed.
Connecticut doesn't require hormone therapy, and the trans girls were winning before they started on hormone therapy. Their lawyer says they're now on hormone therapy. They're no longer winning.
Is it purely about hormones? Because, of course, the reason that men's sport and women's sport are separate in a number of cases is because of the development of muscle, strength, bigger size, bulk, weight, not testosterone at a certain point.
It's the body mechanics.
It's the development of that body over years.
Even after hormone therapy, trans women will maintain some advantages. As you say, they're bigger, stronger. That is true. Trans women have disadvantages too. Their larger frames are now being powered by reduced muscle mass, reduced aerobic capacity. It's a big car with a small engine competing against a small car with a small engine. And all you see is the big car.
Like boxing and weightlifting, clearly, it's a foregone conclusion.
Having a bigger frame
not worth
is going to be an advantage.
And I think the real
would you allow, somebody like Anthony Joshua to box in women's boxing in a year's time if he had the treatment?
There's a weight category issue. I'm not sure about the weight categories. He'd be a lot bigger than any woman, but if he was in a woman's size weight category, yes, I would.
You would let Floyd Mayweather, who is pound for pound the most successful boxer in male history, you would let him in a year's time compete at the same weight against women?
Yeah, if there's a weight category.
This is nonsense. I'm sorry.
It's absolute garbage.
How could you possibly countenance putting Floyd Mayweather, the most dangerous boxer pound for pound, arguably in the history of boxing, into a ring with women born to female bodies? This is where the argument becomes utterly ridiculous. And it's not transphobic to say so, it's common sense.
There's a fighter called Fallon Fox in the mixed martial arts world who is a big individual, got into a fight, round 1, broke somebody's skull.
So, that was in 2014. Can you have something more recent? Trans women are not taking over women's sports.
It's irrelevant.
trans women are not causing massive injuries. Trans women in rugby, for instance, haven't created one injury in the last 5 years.
There's a trans woman in cricket in Kent who averaged something like 17 playing men's cricket and now averages 135
on the verge of
playing
selection
women's
for
cricket and was deemed Women Cricketer of the Year in Kent. That is ridiculous, and nothing against that woman. I totally respect the fact she's transitioned and wants to be a woman. Fine. But you were competing against male cricketers at a certain level, and now your level, despite the treatment, has actually 10 times improved. How can that be fair?
She hasn't said whether she's on treatment or not. I would presume that she's not, because she hasn't said so. Again, if we watched her go under treatment, we would see a massive change in her.
But you know, in your heart, and I respect the battle that you're waging to support transgender rights, and you know, I get this is a real hot potato, very complicated. But honestly, when our viewers hear you say that Floyd Mayweather should be allowed to box against women of the same weight in a year's time if he just has a bit of testosterone treatment, and what I don't like about it is it's not just ridiculous and highly dangerous for women to even suggest that, but it makes a mockery to me of people like India who have actually gone through transitioning.
And it
makes transgenderism become a subject of open mockery.
Joanna,
and it also creates a backlash, though, because
but you not see that? You must hear that
people
from other transgender people like India.
Things like this happening. I think women justifiably do feel things like toilets. I went to the Old Vic recently, and it's absolutely ludicrous. The only gender as such that has a dedicated bathroom now is gender neutral. Men and women have had to give up their rights. But the real issue here is that this is going to be a gradual creep. The original rules for transgender athletes came in just prior to the 2004 Olympics. Then it used to be you had to have a full medical transition, be on estrogen for 2 full years. That then changed prior to the 2016 Olympics, so you just had to lower your testosterone. We're now into a world where self-ID is coming up, and in future Olympics, if this is allowed now, you're going to have individuals
I agree. We shouldn't allow trans women to go just under self-ID. Hormones make a big difference. I know that better than anyone.